Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 343 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In this episode, we are going to build a new fuel plant that burns solid fuel, and then we are going to talk about our plutonium burning strategy. Enjoy! I went through most of the factory and tried to upgrade any machines that could use it. So basically what I've been doing is looking at pollution over, the past 1 minute or 10 minutes or something like that, and looking for whatever is the highest. And you can see how electronics assembling machine 3s are kind of high, but now they're going down. So maybe, let's say, assembling machine 4. So then I would use the factory search mod, and then we can search entity, assembling machine 4, and basically go through these. But we don't have to do like the 1s and 2s, because who cares? They're not doing anything. It's the big setups that are potentially consuming a lot of resources. Like, I haven't updated these for robots, but they also barely run, so it kind of doesn't matter. But then here we go. We've got a setup here that is working on algae that could be updated, but those aren't running, and those have already been updated. So some of these setups, of course, just produce pollution, and there's nothing you can do about it. But I kind of just went through the machines, and I haven't necessarily upgraded, as you can tell, since we're not using the highest tier of machines, every single location, because it just doesn't seem necessary. But for the purposes of cleaning up pollution, we certainly can look for either machines that have all productivities in them, or machines that have nothing and can clearly benefit. So in the case of these machine 2s, since they don't have any speeds and the setup presumably isn't designed for it, just one efficiency and one pollution cleaning will basically get it just about as low as it can be. So I've just been kind of going through here and cleaning things up as appropriate. And you see this location had tons and tons of these that could use modules still, because they're the ones down there, but also ones up here too. It looks like we're out of modules, but robots will handle the rest of them. So that's what I've been doing. And the pollution cloud is, I feel like it's getting smaller. It's hard to tell, but at least, I don't know if it was like this before, but look, there's actually a pollution hole right here, kind of where we're standing, because these algae farms and also the Benefran farms are sucking up pollution. And in fact, they're sucking up a not insubstantial amount. They're helping, they certainly do. But if you really want to see the story, let's look at 250 hours in the past, where the factory was kind of a whole lot of nothing, and then pollution starts. So what about 50 hours ago? Well, there's some, but mainly it's just some electric mining drills that seem to get pollution, and that was probably after productivity modules were put into those mining drills. And then a little more recently, got an assembling machine, but here's the big one that came in, the centrifuges. And that's clearly when we installed those and started running them. And of course, more mining drills. So really, if you take the centrifuges out and the mining drills out, the big pollution stuff only happened about 10 hours ago. So then we look at this, and it's chemical plants, electric mining drills, assembling machines. So what happened within the past 10 hours of gameplay? Probably the module updates, because it's not like we got newer tiers of modules or anything. And, it seems like it just dropped off a cliff right about here. So what happened here? I think that was when, about 5 hours ago, that I did the module change to the pollution of the productivity module to make them a little more reasonable, and then suddenly that pollution disappeared. And we had a little chemical plant 3 action going on here. I think that was making batteries. And even in the past hour, which is basically a flat line on this chart, has been me going through and, seeing like, oh, electronics assembling machine 3s, let's knock those down. Liquefiers, let's knock those down. Assembling machine 2s, let's knock those down. So now we're running at about, the maximum machine is 468, when 10 hours ago it was 15,000. And sometimes more than one machine did that much. So the amount of pollution that has been cut out is pretty substantial. That I think certain parts of the factory were above 1,000 pollution units. And now it seems like most parts of the factory are below 500, if not well below 500. And it's hard to say exactly how much less pollution the biters are absorbing. I would say it's probably at least only a third of what it used to be. Of course, they're still leaving a bunch of orbs. But now, suddenly, the wall can stand up to them once again without much issues. But nonetheless, we should go down there and update the wall because we've got the other sections fixed. And hey, it looks like the water is starting to turn blue again because it used to be very green. But I wonder if we have a lot of orbs hanging around. It looks like we do, and they're technically within robot gathering reach, which is interesting that the robots can gather just about at the maximum range of the plasma turret. I wonder if that's no accident. But you can see all of the craters that the plasma turret seems really good at keeping the biters at bay, at least at 42% of evolution. So I think now, instead of relying on gathering turrets, well, we should just do this. And since our robot network covers everything, well, that's a lot. Whew. It's not going to be that big a deal to just do this instead, since it's easy enough and robots can take things everywhere they need to go. But fighters, get out of the way. I need to build something. And definitely, like, the biggest pollution consumer for biters was those fire biters, which I think were constantly burning down the turrets. So now that that's less of an issue, the wall should be a lot safer. Even with those changes, though, the factory still consumes a reasonable amount of power. At least this is when the reactors are on, so we have to wait for them to turn off here. You know, 2.6 gigawatts or so. But overall, adding those modules into those machines, I rather liked the balance. It seemed like it was very reasonable. So now, instead of basically always putting productivities in without really thinking about it, that you basically kind of have a choice. And you can decide what you want to do. Ah, there's a lot of trees in the way. Which, for game balance, seems like a pretty good thing. And I've been surprised at how easy these walls have been to build, that it seems like the biters really haven't been much of a danger to the wall building, usually. At least my experience is when you try to build walls, the biters are constantly trying to tear them down while you're trying to put them up. Okay, let's get this started, like right here. I think there's enough room for another wall. And down we go. Trying to put landfill in such a way that it looks somewhat appealing after the biters filled it in very haphazardly. Let's just build this one part of the wall for now and see how that works. Certainly have lots of things to build. Although they're making pretty quick progress. It's kind of surprising. There's a couple of things we need to update, but essentially we need to update our whole power setup here. It's going to mostly be the same, but we're going to want to take a look at the logic and make sure we're handling things correctly in the nuclear era that we're now in. So first, I would like to make a new burner setup, and it's going to burn a couple of different things. The main ones are going to be alien artifacts, fuel value of 10, the wood bricks, fuel value of 20, the enriched fuel block, which has a fuel value of 50, and solid fuel, which has a fuel value of 12. So I ask all this because we need to find out what the limiting factor is in all of this, and it's essentially the small alien artifacts. So if we were burning those, what kind of setup would we need? Well, we would have burner heat source, and it looks like we have burner heat source 2. Would we have 3? Nope, looks like it only goes up to 2, but the maximum temperature is 1,000 degrees, so it is quite warm. So that won't be a problem. So burner heat source 2. And as far as neighbor bonus, since they're not super dense with heat, let's do an 8 to show how that would work. Is this window gonna stay? Well, it stays this time. So we'll burn the artifacts. and say an input, and then we just decide how many of these we want to burn. Like our belts do 60, so we can get an idea that if we did do that, we would be making 2.2 gigajoules. So that's cool for now, but let's set that back to 0 and instead compute by factory. And since we're doing a set of 8, let's just do 8. So we can figure out what the setup would be. 7.2 for alien artifacts. Well, we're still kind of managing to destroy stuff. I think we just got to give the wall a little bit of time because, yeah, we're starting to get our plasma turrets and they help. Gotta watch out where you aim those things, though. I bet that would completely decimate your wall if they hit the wall. It doesn't seem to like to do the heat automatically, so we've got to put it in there. Our goal is to create steam. 615. Put it down. Make sure it's the heat exchanger. And it links. And it's going to need approximately 2 pipes worth of water, but we can also do the ducts thing that we did before if we need a whole bunch of it. And finally, the turbines to make that into electricity. And it's a 1-to-2 ratio when it comes to heat exchangers to turbines. So we can do like 8, 18, 36 would be a nice even number to do here. And that would be fed by half of a yellow belt. So if we wanted to max out a purple belt, we would need 8 of these. So now we have an idea of a setup. Well, first we need our square of 8, which would be like this. The fuel would have to come in. And potentially the heat pipes could skip by, because I'm wondering if we can also do more of them on each side right there. So it just kind of depends on what the shape would be, but probably we're still going to be limited on how many of these we can put in such a small area, because ultimately we need 18 of them. And that's most of them, but that only gets us 16, so we would need 2 more. But we actually could potentially get those right on the end here. So let's try to do something like that, where it's kind of actually comes around like this. So we got rid of those. That would give us the 18. So we want to try to make the heat pipes as short as reasonably possible. Well, we can make it even more square if we space these out a bit. We would have to figure out exactly how to get the water in there, but I'm sure we could make it happen. Then if we did this, that would be super dense. So that's 11. We could remove the 2 on the bottom. Flip sides. Put it like right there. Put 2 more like that. So now we can get rid of 4 more. So what is that? That's still our 18. And everything is connected by a heat pipe. We'll have to figure out how to exactly to get the water in all of these, but I'm sure we could make that happen. Pick these up. Place them directly against the heat pipes there. And it seems fine. About equal distance to go to all these corners. And then they need 7.2 a second, so 1 yellow inserter will be fine for all of these. There'll probably be a purple belt going between everything. And it will unload as required. And I'm kind of thinking we can basically do the same thing, but kind of put it down here to kind of try to get maximum density. Actually, we may not need to deal with ducts at all if we have enough space for some pumps in here, but there is also room right in the middle for some ducts. So let's try to make it symmetrical here. It's not going to be perfect, but it'll basically be like this. Oh yeah, what about substations to reach everything? Yes, we can do them in here. Those are spaced out a little bit. And would those reach if this thing was copied? Yes, they would. This is going to be a real long and thin setup unless we do multiple sets of them, but the fuel belt would go between both sides. Then there would be one of these basically on each side. And it can connect right there. Is this going to reach all the way? Not quite. It's so close, though. It's like 1 square away. So let's just bake that into this. So small pipe in there, small pipe in there. Oh yeah, and of course the robot zones. Probably just like one of these would be more than enough. So let's just put a couple of those in there. Get some power lines in here to get rid of the flashing. I'm not sure if robots can quite reach. It seems like it's taken the robots a long time to get here, but maybe they were just unavailable. Let's see, we do need to get water hooked up here. We could probably do that with another one of these. So we might want to be careful where we put this stuff. But yeah, something like that. Which gets us 2 of these setups. Or a yellow belt, so we would need essentially 4 of them in total, so what would it look like? First of all, does it tile this way? It does, and putting 4 of these in a row doesn't seem too crazy. And then on this side, it's also good. And what happens if we wanted to stack them this way instead? Well, there's not much blocking them, but they certainly would work. Okay. Well, we've got the setup now, and the fuel would basically come in through here, and there would be water right here, so we might as well make use of it. And actually, this probably isn't the worst space, because going down would run into this road. Not that it's really used for much, but putting these to the side would probably work pretty well since the fuel is coming in there. And we do have our logic, so we should probably just pick this entire thing up, just so we don't lose that, and put it somewhere else. Who knows? Like right there. Cool. Well, we don't need any of these wires then, or this accumulator that was being used to set all this. This will probably mess up the robot network, but that's fine. Okay. So let's put a couple more in here. And this, kind of like the nuclear setup, is somewhat flawed in the sense that it won't be able to produce any power when it's hooked up until all of these burners heat up, because it takes power to make power, but it's not as critical as the reactors, which actually are kind of slow at reacting to things. This thing is a secondary form of power that the reactors are keeping the factory perfectly filled up. So this is not that important to be perfect. So what's the total amount of water for this whole thing? We're going to have 64 of these, and that's 16,000 water, or 16,800, divided by 3,600 for our pumps, so we need 5 of them. We have our little canal of water, and it wasn't built that way. That's just what we left. So these reactor setups are pretty good. So let's just pull 5 of them and pick a spot to go down, like right there. Okay, let's get something in there, but disconnect that wire and that one, and just go in. So it still tried to be connected, and looks like electricity made it to everything okay. Hey, and that wall's making progress here. This is that weird part of the factory that was covered by bricks but never completely fixed. I think because we claimed this at some point, but then the biters just crossed the water, so it didn't matter. That's a cool gun. Let's just fill in the gaps. How does that look? Pretty good. Okay, well that thing is getting all filled up. Now we need to handle the fuel inputs. Guess I'll just leave that storage just there since it's worked up until this point. But we're essentially going to have up to 4 fuels here. So let's do another request depot. This time asking for solid fuel. Now we don't have any solid fuel to put in here, but I suspect that we will, and it'll come by on drone. So we'll have that, and everything will come in. So the way that we control priority is have them go into the fuel belt right here sequentially, just in whatever priority we want them to have. So the thing in front will have highest priority, or in other words, the worst item. And it looks like we actually went through all of the biter orbs that we had saved up. That's crazy. Is that just to make these cannons? Yeah, pretty much. We're actually almost out, which is hilarious. That's fine. The biters keep us supplied. And each one of these will have an input priority on the right. And between these three, we probably want to do the regular fuel blocks because running this will create a lot of useful things. Like it creates glycerol, it creates mineral oil, and a lot of this stuff is low now that none of this is running anymore. Create residual gas by running it. So we probably want to hit those. And we'll hook them up in a second. And then the next one is probably the regular fuel blocks. So we hook it up, and probably just so they all kind of have the same throughput, so they mix correctly. Let's just make this red even though it can't actually keep up with it. Okay, this is trying to connect. So we have plenty of power. So we just hook it up all together, and it's kind of mixing both together because it's two red belts, and that's fine. This setup will burn whatever we feed it, so it doesn't really matter what we put in here. And it's going to take a good long while for these temperatures to increase to something useful. But at least unlike the nuclear reactors, we don't really need to concern ourselves with monitoring temperature. We just leave it hooked up, and it will continue to burn away whatever fuel we have. And actually, we are going to have wood bricks now because we're using so much sodium hydroxide that, assuming we're not loaded up on salt, that we will actually be making it from wood. So, seems good. That's why it's available right now. Let's handle changing those processes in a bit, because we also have some more power setups to add when it comes to nuclear. And hey, look at that. We actually found another 234 after all of this time of not having any. And in fact, since we have 400, I think we already found 2 of them, and now we're working on the 3rd one. So we've done pretty good there. And plutonium has completely stopped because we got up to 10,000 and we just decided that was maximum. So one question you have to ask yourself when you're burning nuclear fuel is, what fuel do you want to burn and why? Because if you want to burn uranium, it's going to create a lot of 238. It's just the end result of that. And if you want to burn plutonium, it's going to be 238 negative because you're turning it into plutonium. And one thing I haven't talked about is the efficiency of reprocessing the mixed oxide fuel cells back into plutonium. So if you look at the recipe here, that 2 plutonium makes 20 fuel cells, so approximately 10 cells per plutonium. And then this recipe handles 5, so if we double it, we'll get approximately 4 americiums. And then if we do the plutonium recovery, 5 americiums will turn into 6 plutoniums. But you have to put a plutonium in, so essentially that means we'll get 5 out of it. So we put 2 plutoniums in, and we get 5 back. So 2 turns into 5, or we gain 3. So it is a breeder cycle by doing that. But the thing you have to consider is the 238 requirement, that this recipe requires 38 238s, and then this one requires 60. And you do get a little bit of it back, but not much. If you consider that this whole cycle made 5 plutoniums, it essentially costs roughly 100 238s, roughly. Or in other words, 20 238s per plutonium. Whereas the space magic enrichment process here, the Kavorex process, or the bobbing about process in Angel Bobs, you only need 3 238s to make a plutonium. So if your only goal is making plutonium, this method is ideal. However, if you burn it, you will get plutonium back too, and you will make more, but it will consume your 238. So I would say if you need plutonium for other things besides burning it, use this method. But if you want to burn plutonium, then you could just burn it and put that plutonium back into the cycle, and you will also make a little bit extra. But back to my original question, do you burn uranium from here, or do you burn plutonium? Well, it depends. If you are heavy on the 238s, which we are, we have a separate warehouse holding them, so we certainly have a lot of them, then burning plutonium is smarter because it is very 238 negative and will make the level go down. However, if you are not maxed out on 238, then it's probably better to make more 235 and 234 cells, which will increase your 238 for when you actually need to do the plutonium. So you kind of have to run both of them, but balance which one you use based on your status of 238. So since we are so heavy on 238 right now, it makes sense that the cycle we would want to run is burning plutonium. And the reactor setup for plutonium is largely the same as uranium, but it has some different considerations. But nonetheless, we need to figure out in Hell mod what we want to do with this. And we already have this cycle figured out. So instead, how about we start something new? And we can make our plutonium reactors whatever size we want them to be. But remember that the uranium reactor burns all three of these fuels, and it produces the same amount of heat regardless of which fuel you use. The difference is how much energy is in the fuel. So the actual sizes of the setups are the same. So we probably want both of these setups to be identical in size, which means easy to copy because we just take this and make another one. And then they could just run as required, and occasionally they will be both running at the same time to create a lot of power. But the end goal is that they don't run at the same time. So we can create a setup here with reactors because we can count the number of reactors that we currently have, which is 48. Then we can come in here, say we want to burn the mixed oxide fuel cells with their 8 gigajoules in there. And we want 4 reactors. And then we'll say by factory, and we have 48 of them. So now we know we need 0.33 of an input. And if we do that, we have our numbers. You can see they're absolutely tiny. That this setup right here will produce 3.7, 3.8 plutonium, something along those lines. Kind of depends on exactly what the input of uranium is, but it's a lot. And to run this, we need a 0.04. So once you get to plutonium, you basically have as much power as you could ever want. It's just a question of scale. But you won't be limited by resources anymore because it's an incredibly efficient fuel process to use. And it requires a fraction of a centrifuge. And I suppose we should put productivities in here because why not? But at the same time, we are at the part of the factory. Moving window. We are at the part of the factory where occasionally some pollution cleanings might be nice, but even then, it's like this thing barely runs. Even with all of these, we only need 0.06 machines, and it's going to make the tiniest bit of pollution on average, so I don't think it matters. And we will have to deliver lead plates via a chopper, and we can just throw productivities in there too, since we need the tiniest amount. Okay. Well, not that it's very difficult to make, but we need to make this. And we need to have logic to determine which one goes, because if they both go all of the time, then it's just going to constantly be running on plutonium. But we do have some logic in here where we need to have at least 1,000 uranium for it to go past. Well, what if we set this number higher and said we needed to have, well, we've got 19,000 in there. So how about 20,000? In other words, the warehouse is almost completely full. And because this is already full, there's not much to see here, but we can kind of pick the stuff out, but now we don't need that anymore. And in fact, we probably want a separate belt just to completely dump this stuff back in here without concern for the level. Basically, we just let it fill to maximum. Okay, now that it's filled up, we don't need these controls anymore on it. We'll just let it run continuously. Of course, it's not going to run because it's going to be filled up. So what this means is that over time, we're going to burn through all of our uranium fuel, and this warehouse is going to be completely jam-packed with 238. However, because it's jam-packed, this belt will allow 238 to go through, which will allow us to create more plutonium, which will create the plutonium fuel that can be burned, but it'll also make room for this. So it kind of goes back and forth where if there's room for uranium, the uranium is made and burned. If there isn't room, then room is made by taking up the 238 and burning plutonium. So that's the weird thing about these nuclear processes, is that really both the limiting and the controlling factor for pretty much all of your processes is 238. How much do you have? And that determines what you do. It's kind of funny. Where it's not the rare resources, but it's the junk one. Okay, well, we need to make the fuel, and we probably don't need to do any special belts because this belt is always going to be filled, and so will the plutonium. We have this here saying it has to be above 20,000 just to make sure that it's there, but in practice, this warehouse is always going to be maxed out. We just want to make sure something doesn't happen on accident that completely empties this. Like, for example, we mess this up and we just start making too much plutonium. Because if you run out of 238, surprisingly, you can't do much of anything. So you always want to have a bunch of 238 on hand. We don't need to have any extra belts or anything here. We can just have these inputs, and it's shockingly tiny. Put that there. Switch it over to the mixed oxide fuel cells. By the way, how are these burner setups going? Well, they used up all available fuel. And looks like they did get to the proper temperature, because they're at 620, 621, and the minimum was about 615. So it seems like it worked correctly. And this latch is always on because it's one of the higher ones set to 60, so basically it's always going to try to burn anything we throw into it, which is what we want to see because we don't want to be clogged up on anything else here. Where are the lead coils and how would we get them over here? Kind of looks like it would be a bit of a pain, but also they're just not that far away because they're actually right up here and could more or less go straight down. But because the amount that we would need is so low, let's just make a request for them. And it looks like it's not in any warehouse, which is fine. This is a sufficiently short path that I think robots are more than sufficient for. Of course, we can grab a few resources to get this process started. There it goes. Glowing nice and orangey. But it's a very slow process, but at the same time, there's so much energy in it that it's not much of an issue. And that's the end of this episode. On the next one, we are going to build and test our new plutonium power plant. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.